Thanks for coming to the Teaching Montana History Online PLC. And this month, the focus is on the skills. The first one, we talked a lot about the big picture ideas. And so this time I thought we could look a little bit about skills. Before we start, I'll have Colette tell you a little bit about how these things work.
That sounds great. Thanks, Martha. I'm Colette, and if you are on a PC, your controls will look exactly like this. If you're on a Mac, which I know Christy is, they will look slightly different, but please make sure that your audio settings, make sure that you can hear through your speakers and select the correct ones. You can do a quick sound check if you like, or you're more than welcome to join us via a phone call, and it's just a click on the button next to phone call to then dial in on your telephone for audio. Also, I want to make sure that you are aware of the chat box so you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, ask questions, comment along the way, and we encourage you to do that. We take the chat log and include that as part of the information that goes into the Teacher Learning Hub course that corresponds with this online PLC. Back to you, Martha.
All right, so please do go ahead and type in the chat box who you are and where you teach and what grade, and we'll keep, as you have questions, that too. As I said, I'm Martha Cole. I work at the Montana Historical Society, and I'm joined by Christy Mockstutz and Colette Bartow from Office of Public Instruction, and it's a wonderful thing to have this kind of partnership. I wanted to start just last time we spent a lot of time writing our way in. I think most of the session was write your way in. We're not going to do that this time, but I do want to, and I'm going to put a timer on it, spend 5 minutes on this write your way in document, which you can get to through the link in the chat box, or and I'm going to pull it up on the screen, I'm going to put a timer on. If you're watching this as part of a recording later at home, I hope you'll go to this document, please, and go ahead and spend some time reading, writing, and commenting. We're going to keep this document live and going, and I think it's really helpful to sort of clarify thoughts. So I'm going to set my stopwatch to 5 minutes, and if people want to join me here, to think a little bit about skills and maybe how they relate to and are different than content, what kind of skills we want to teach, what kind of other skills, well, you can see what other people say they want to teach, and we'll just write for 5 minutes. And like I said, if you're joining us later as a recording thing, please come here and write and comment away. And if you already wrote in advance, if you would go to the document and comment on what other people have written or ask some questions, that would be wonderful. I was really impressed last time with the interactions that we saw on the Google Doc.
And even afterward, when other people were commenting and reflecting on each other's words. So that's really awesome. It's hard to be quiet during these 5 minutes, but that's what this time is for.
All right. We are at 5 minutes.
That was a fast 5 minutes, Martha.
That was the fastest 5 minutes ever. I really appreciated everyone who came here before the meeting started and wrote your comments, because it allowed me to kind of come early and do a little prep to see what some of the skills were that people wanted to teach their kids, and then allowed me then to look at some of the tools that I knew about that might help with that. And I'm going to go through some of that, and hopefully other people will chime in if they know a good tool. And so one of the people who responded early who wrote their way in last week, said that they were interested in their students learning how to do close reading, which, as Tammy really interestingly said in this chat just now, that so many of the skills that we want to learn in history are the same ones that we want to learn in English. One of my favorite close reading tools is visual thinking strategies, and I'm wondering, and you can either speak up or type in your message, has anyone ever used VTS in their class? You can go ahead and type in the chat or just talk out. But I'm curious if you've ever used this. It is, I think, a tremendously useful tool to teach thinking skills, communication skills, visual literacy, but also really close reading, and it uses mostly images, and the thing I like about that is there's real scaffolding. You can learn to do close reading on images even if text is challenging for you, and then you can transfer that close reading skill to text. And it's really deceptively simple. The presenter starts by saying, what is going on here? And then the students answer, and then if a student answers, the teacher then paraphrases their answer to make sure that they got it right, to make sure that they know that they're being listened to make connection with other people's answers. And then the other question that you can ask is, what do you see that makes you say that, which is asking for an evidence to back up your claim. So if I'm looking at a picture and I say, she's happy, well, what do you see to make you say that? Well, she's smiling. Okay, I'm looking at her smile. And then what more can you find? So those are the only three things besides paraphrasing that the instructor gets to do with this. Paraphrasing is really, really hard. The other trick to VTS is not saying, oh, good answer, with, not giving, not expressing your own opinion, not giving praise, so that every answer is valuable and valid. And it's tremendous, like I've watched it being done, and it's hard to learn how to do well. It takes a lot of practice, I think, especially for teachers who are used to telling people about things as opposed to letting them, or maybe I shouldn't put this on you guys. It's hard for me to, if I have a picture of a homesteading poster, I want to tell you what I know about it as opposed to let you read it closely and figure it out, and then I want to tell you what you got right and what you got wrong, and that's not this particular technique. But I think it's the kind of thing that practicing looking closely at an image and deriving meaning, and some people use it with poetry, and some people use it with, you can use it with photographs, you can use it with cartoons, is a really important skill. So if it's something that interests you, vtshome.org is the place to get more information. And I especially love it because of that requirement to make evidence-based claims, which is obviously a Common Core. What do you see that makes you say that? You get everyone, you get to make evidence-based claims. You don't just get to spout off opinions. You have to be able to back up your claims with evidence. Does anyone else out there have a particularly useful close reading tool that they like, that they want to share? Everyone's mic is off but mine.
I'll share the link in a second too, but the Teaching with Primary Sources program at the Library of Congress has some really great, and it's very parallel or very similar to what the visual thinking strategies are, but it's just another source with some nice packages of primary documents and images that you can use with students to really get their juices flowing around interesting events and, just those images too.
Yeah. All right.
Christy?
And yes, I was just going to add that often for close reading techniques, I like to have students as they're reading through an article, and this is definitely sort of needs an article or a piece of text, but to really have them interact with the text in a way where they do a check mark for something that the author is saying that they agree with, put an exclamation point for something that's new or surprising, put a question mark next to something that they have a question about or they want more information about. And that's one of the sort of go-to techniques that I use often to have students when they read a text and then reread it with these kind of ways of interacting with the text, and it helps them to frame discussions around the text with each other and with the teacher, and so that's a technique that I use quite a bit.
So another thing that came out in among the comments, the Write Your Way In that happened before the session, was organizing ideas and citation was a skill that they wanted their students to take away. And I just thought, man, National History Day is a model that really is pretty phenomenal for this. And again, I'd be real interested in seeing in the chat if anyone has looked at National History Day or thought about doing this with their kids. What it is it's a nationally recognized history education program, and it's contest-based, but you don't have to participate in the contests in order to use the curriculum. Every year there's a theme. This year's theme is taking a stand in history, and students get to choose any topic to research independently on that team. But as a teacher, you can limit that. So if you're doing Montana history, you can say you have to choose a Montana history topic to research on that theme. And you have to get information. And the nice thing about a theme is it requires a more complicated thesis than this is what happened, because you have to tie what your topic to a theme. So you get you learn that not just the research skills, but the writing skills, and it requires annotated bibliographies. It requires that you use primary and secondary sources, and the contest model allows you to present your project in several ways, from an exhibit to a performance. But as a teacher, if what you really want them to do is write a paper, then you can require them to write a paper, and that's one of the, so you as a teacher get to limit it to make sure it's meeting your class needs, but there's freedom for the students to choose a topic that is actually interesting to them, which engages them. And if you do get involved in a contest, then there's some motivation to do a good job creating the annotated bibliography and do the citations correctly. I know when my daughter participated, she hated doing that citations and bibliography, and she only did it because she wanted to win the contest. So,
but it is still a valuable skill, not necessarily knowing the right formula in that. Of course, I'm going to speak as the teacher librarian in the group, but it's that giving credit to the intellectual property of others, or to understand in a very real way that information comes from somewhere, and we need to acknowledge that. But I think I think what gets really exciting is when you do that annotation, that a student has to, if you set up criteria for that, that the annotation needs to give some context. It needs to include some information about why you chose a particular source. And I think that's as valuable, in some ways, kind of like what I was saying about paraphrasing in the chat too. Those are immensely critical skills for being able to analyze and evaluate information in very powerful ways, and all of that takes practice.
Absolutely. And I did not in any way mean to suggest that it was not valuable. I'm just saying that she was refusing to learn it until she wanted to win the contest. So she walked away with something really important.
By any means necessary, right?
Exactly. So another skill that people talked about wanting their students to walk away with was being able to evaluate primary and secondary sources. There's a ton of graphic organizers to help you do this. I think Colette mentioned the Library of Congress has one, National Archives has one, TPS Barat has one. And again, Polly and Tammy, if you have favorites, I'd love to hear about it. I'm going to share one of my new favorites, which is the History Project 6 C's. And the 6 C's are content, citation, context, connections, communications, and conclusions. So it looks like this, more or less. It has better boxes than this. So it didn't translate into PowerPoint super well, but I like it because it's, you're required to pull out the main idea. You're asking author, creator, and who created it, which also leads you to why, why they created it. It's important to know who created things, not just to give credit, but to understand their point of view and their perspective. And I think we were talking a little bit about that in the Google Doc. And unlike a lot of the other primary source tools, it's trying to move beyond the document itself to the context. And I think that's a super significant thing that a lot of the other primary source tools tend to stay just simply within the document. But this one, moves beyond that. I also really have another great model, I think, is this Stanford History Education Group. I think it was Tammy. It was like, what's SHEG in the document? And I was like, I'm a groupie. This is my favorite. And they really, this is their model, is sourcing, asking who wrote this, why was it written, when was it written, what was the author's perspective, how reliable is it, also looking at that context, how might the circumstances in which the document was created affect its content, corroborating, what did the other documents say, do they agree, why or why not, what are other possible things I could look at, which ones are most reliable, and then doing that kind of close reading. And these are real-world skills, I think, that we need to teach our students. I think we were talking a little bit in the chat about, or in the Write Your Way In, about how important it was to teach students to do research and to figure out what kind of information is reliable. And SHEG talks about this as the habits of historical thinking, that, you always have to ask, who wrote this, when was it written, and for what purpose, and then you can move on to these questions about reliability and the like. I just also, along those same lines, found something that really takes those two models and has put it in this really groovy little, it's a plastic, and in the middle is clear plastic, so you can see it's has the sourcing questions on the left, who created it, who's the intended audience, and then the contextualizing and close reading questions on the right, and then the document. This is a clear frame. The document goes in the middle. So I just put a document in there, and you can write on them with dry erase markers, so you can circle things and just underline them and arrow and kind of work with this document on this transparency. So here's an example of how you might do that, and then it just erases. I don't know, teachers, I think this seemed like a ridiculously useful tool. Oh, good. Tammy says that's awesome. I'm assuming that she's talking about these S-stack things. Are you, Tammy?
Yeah, that is really cool. I love that.
I thought it was maybe, yeah. So anyway, you can order them. Coley, can we put this into the link, socialstudiescentral.com, my products. And I think, like I said, they're about $38, $40 for a classroom set. And and I just got mine. I didn't get a whole classroom set. I just got a sample. It just arrived on last Monday, and I was excited to start playing with them.
It's just deceptively simple, and I think that's, one of the strengths, or one of the things that we sometimes forget, is that it doesn't have to be ritzy and glitzy and have, a battery and a cord and all of that. It's just, I think it would be cool to have that, especially if you had a light box, and maybe that's not even necessary to have it behind it.
I guess you could do it on if you had to project, but if you have a classroom set, everyone gets their own,
Yeah.
And I just love the way, who created it, and they just circled at the bottom and put an arrow there, When do you think it was created? Late 1800s, and why? Convince people to move west. So you can just kind of point to things, and what are the influences? They're kind of pointing around to stuff, and you can. Jen and Polly asked, Jen and I teach fourth grades, how can we use this with our students? They have a K5 version of this also. So this is the 612 version, but they have another version that's K5. So I think it would be the questions. It's basically the same thing, only the language is a little bit simpler. Yeah. So really fun.
I think this is really great. I love the interactiveness of it, just in the fact that students then can have that interactive back and forth, like actually circle here where you think, where that evidence is in this picture, or circle the text or underline. And I just think anytime we get that interaction going on, that's where students can really start to draw those connections to the evidence and start to learn the language to talk about how their evidence supports whatever it is they're claiming or understanding or contextualizing about that piece. So I think this is really great. Colleen, we need to find a way we can use these.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think, I mean, one of the big skills besides sourcing, besides asking who created it, when, and for what purpose, like every single document, every single article, I hope you are having your kids ask those questions, is the idea that I need evidence to back up my claims. Mm-hmm. You know, Tom Rust, who's a professor at MSU Billings, used to say, you know, opinions are like noses, everyone has one, and they smell, you know.
Oh, I love it.
So you know, I would tell students, I don't care about your opinion, I care about, you know, your evidence-based mm-hmm. You know, what is, you know, and those are two different things, and those are absolutely ELA skills, Tammy, yeah, as she mentioned. So for sure, there's a lot of overlap, I think. It's one of the reasons why some people got really stressed out about Common Core, that they put history under ELA, and it actually didn't bother me that much because I think the skills are very connected.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. When we're talking about information skills, analysis, we're all speaking the same language, perhaps with a little bit different vocabulary sometimes, but the heart of it is that these are essential skills that students need to have across the board.
Yeah, and Tammy just asked a really good question. How do we teach our students to be savvy internet researchers? And again, I went to this great presentation by Sam Weinberg, who's the one who founded the Stanford History Education Group, who talked about that a lot. And again, looking at a website and said, who created this, for what purpose? When was it created? And anymore, you know, we used to tell kids, oh, don't you, you know, if it's .com, it's not reliable, but if it's .org, it is, but that's absolutely untrue now. Mm-hmm. You know, so they really need to be way more sophisticated in terms of thinking about authorship and purpose.
And I think the way that we teach our students to be savvy internet researchers is to help them practice with analysis, whether it's online, whether it's a primary source, whatever it is. But I think there's also a responsibility to take the time to model for students what it is to be a savvy, ethical, you know, and efficient internet researcher. I think, like anything, we can't just assume or, you know, put out rules, you know, always do this or always don't do this. Kids, we actually have to help them engage and to practice those skills too. So it's hard to maybe think about sometimes putting a pause on other parts of curriculum that we feel like we need to cover. We do that sometimes at the expense of developing the underlying skills that are going to serve students better in getting that content later on. So I really highly recommend being very intentional about teaching these skills, and that it begins in preschool and kindergarten, that we begin at the early stages in you know, in the developmentally appropriate way, giving students the opportunity to practice and to become really proficient, so that when we unleash them into the wild world of the internet or other places, once they leave us, then they're really prepared.
And I just want to add to that I think it's important, just because, you know, we're teaching them to question authorship, you know, and the purpose of things are created, and just because everything has a perspective and a purpose for being created does not mean that there's not truth out there. I think that's something that sometimes kids fall into, this idea, well, it's just all perspective. And it absolutely, perspective absolutely impacts, you know, what is written, but that doesn't mean that there is not also something that is true. And we might not be able to find it, especially historically, you know, we might have to, you know, it's hard to get at it, but we definitely want to approach it
And be persistent, to use that perseverance and persistence, which we talk a lot about in mathematics as mathematical practice, but the same applies here. We need to persist.
And it's really about corroboration too, and so looking at things from multiple different angles to try to kind of, it's a calculus, get as close to truth as possible when we're talking about history.
I love it. So Martha, we're at 4:32 p.m. So
all right.
Without any other questions at the moment, I would like to have us move forward.
All right, because it's time to go.
It is.
So I'm just going to say that I'm happy to stay on and visit with people afterwards if you want to keep talking or you still have questions, but to be respectful of the 4 to 4:30, we can say we hope you'll go to the Write Your Way Out to earn renewal units for this class, but also just because it's useful to process information that way.
Absolutely.
And we hope that we will see you. Oh, here we go. This is how you get there. You have to go ahead, Colette, you can do this.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just briefly, if you haven't already signed up on the Teacher Learning Hub, you can go to the address that's on the screen there, sign up for a quick free account, and enroll in the course. It is called the Teaching Montana History Online PLC. And I think we can go to the next slide. And once you get enrolled in that course, you'll see for October a Write Your Way Out. It's a discussion forum, and there are a number of people, about 10, who have completed September. So we look forward to your responses. Martha is wonderful about replying and reviewing your information. So this is the prompt for Write Your Way Out for October.
And you can always contact me away from the class, and we hope to see you next month for reading strategies, because I know that working with Montana Stories of the Land textbook has been a challenge for some people. So we're going to talk about reading strategies. And end of show, I think.
That is fantastic.